did you get started in the business?
So Cliff Notes version. I was, I don't know, my early 20s, seen a couple of hypnotists here and there. Didn't know if it was real or not. Got hypnotized in college. Knew it was definitely something very cool, but didn't want to pursue it. Got into stand-up comedy, won a couple of competitions, opened up for the headliner that was coming in, which was a hypnotist. He liked my work, asked me to go on the road with him for 30 days. And, you know, being 20 and not having anything going on in life, I jumped at the chance. About halfway through the tour, he was traveling with the DJ. They got into a huge fight. And the DJ went, well, you have to need me. You can't fire me. And he's like, get in the car. And all of a sudden they disappear for about 90 minutes. He comes back and I'm like, you know, where's Steve? And he's like, I fired him. I put him on a bus. He's going home. And then he looked at me and goes, can you DJ for me? And I was like, you play 6 songs, sure, it's play and stop. So it was supposed to be a 30-day thing. And 2 years later, I'm on the road with him, you know, supposed to being his tour manager, was basically be his bitch, just do all the driving, set up the sound, help him write shows, the whole 9 yards. And during that time, he had trained, you know, about 4 other hypnotists, including Anthony Cools. And of course, me being his sidekick, I had to sit through everything and listen to everything and make him look and sound good and let them practice on me. And then I walked away from it, not thinking I'd ever use it. And I was working at a bar, working my way up. That's where I wanted to be. I wanted to be in the entertainment business. I love food. I love music. I loved entertaining. I wanted to manage and eventually own my own bar. So I got offered a job, worked my way up. I was one of the managers, and some of the staff asked me if I could hypnotize anybody. I was like, I've never tried, but you know, I've seen it enough times. And sure enough, I just do it for fun. And the owner saw the show, ended up getting me to do a fundraiser. And everything else is history. That's like 28 years ago. And so I started doing shows. I did the same bar that I worked at for 77 Sundays in a row.
Come on.
Yeah, serious. And during that time, you know, people would hear about it. And so actually it wasn't 77 Sundays. It was 78 Sundays, or I did 77 shows and 78 Sundays. I did 3 shows in a row every Sunday, did my 3rd show. And the owner was like, okay, you know, we're not going to, calls me back in the office on Monday and goes, we're not going to do it next Sunday. I don't want to kill it. You got a good thing going for you. And I'm like, oh, okay, that's fine. And so I went out of town. I get my phone blows up that night. I get home about 2 a.m. and I notice about 25 calls from the bar. And I'm thinking, like, I'm one of the managers, and I also ran all the doormen at the time. I'm thinking that, you know, there's either a huge fight or there's a fire or something. Call back the owner, and I'm like, what's wrong? And he's like, I had 400 people show up. I'm like, what? 400 people came to see your show. I had to buy everybody free drinks. You're doing the show next Sunday. I told him you're going to be here next Sunday. He goes, where the hell were you? And I was like, you told me I didn't have to work. I went out of town. And then I did another 74 Sundays in a row until I took the show on the road permanently on tour. And then during the time about my 20th show there, 2-3 other bars that picked me up within a couple 100-mile radiuses. And so, like, every Tuesday I was at this one bar, every Wednesday I was at this one bar, every Sunday I was at my bar, and then fill in the Fridays and Saturdays and still work the bar as one of the managers.
Was that in Canada?
That was in Canada. Yeah. So I'm a Canadian boy. That was in Canada. That's where, you know, Tone Lee, Anthony Cools, Mark Savard, you know,
then you took it to Europe,
Michael
though,
C.
right?
Anthony.
Like you took, because I remember you talking about, like, you were getting in planes and, like, hopping.
So, I mean, I had this amazing manager. He actually managed Tony Lee, and then he managed Anthony Cools, and then Anthony Cools had dropped him because now he was permanently in the States doing casinos. And this was before he did Vegas. He ended up picking me up opened some doors for me, got me into Iceland of all places. And it was an amazing experience. I remember just, I mean, first of all, it's like, wow, somebody booked me in Iceland. All right, this is pretty cool. And I'd come down to the States to do shows, and they're like, hey, Pete, there's, you know, I got all my paperwork and everything else. Oh no, I got all my flight details and everything, but I got no paperwork, no working visas, nothing. Like, what do I do? What do I say? Who am I meeting? He goes, call up the guy. You're going to meet him next week. I'm like, okay, fine. I call him up, you know, thank him, because I mean, this guy doesn't know who I am or anything. He had a partner in the US that's how they found me, through my manager. And you know, I thank him, kiss his butt, like, you know, somebody's flying me out overseas to do a show. This is amazing. And we're talking away. And I'm like, well, so when I get to customs, I said, when I go to the US, you know, I always have paperwork that I have to show, you know, to prove I can work in the States. And I'm like, you know, what do I need any paperwork? What do I need to do? What do I need to say? And he's like, oh, don't worry. They should know who you are when you get there. And if they don't, just tell them to ask for me, and they'll get me. And I'm like, okay, thank you. Hang up the phone and think in my head, who the hell is this guy? And sure enough, you know, I get to immigration. The guy looks at me and goes, oh, you're the entertainer. Stamp, walk through. And I'm like, what the hell just happened? Usually it's 20, 30 questions, why I'm here, how long I'm going to be for, the whole 9 yards, and nothing. And my DJ that was with me at the time, his jaw's wide open. He's like, I'm with him. And I walked through, and the one thing I noticed was, you know, first of all, I thought everybody was staring at me because I stuck out like a sore thumb. You know, here's a colored person in Iceland, but everybody knew who I was. They had promoted me, and I want to say that I was world famous in Iceland, because they knew who I was before I even got there. And then the shows just went off. A video went viral. I know you, Paul, you and I talked about this. There's the whole, you know, brunette with the orgasms and the chairs and everything else. And that was
that was how I didn't know who you were until the chair video went viral. And then I was like, look at this dude. Like, and then so it was a big deal. I remember. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I wish I could have cashed in it a lot better than I did. I mean, I did very well with that video going viral, but the whole website and the links and everything else were all to an Icelandic site that was all in Icelandic. But MTV Europe picked it up, and they called me the best hypnotist in the world. The next thing you know, I was in 12 different countries the following year doing shows everywhere.
Yeah.
And here I had this one video that went viral, you know, before YouTube, before everything. And I was told it was like 54 million hits, and that was during dial-up downloads.
Right. Yeah. That was not, it was a very different landscape. Tell me, man, like, when you think back to that, as you're retelling that story, like, as an artist, how would you have rated yourself as a stage hypnotist right up to that point where the video went viral?
You know, back then, I mean, I guess just like any artist, you know, I thought I was really, really good. And I look back at it now, you know, I think I hit my peak even 10 years after, as far as a showman and having the right stage show and everything else. But at that time, you know, everything was new. Everything was just wild. It was wild, wild west, as far as shows, bookings. Everything was word of mouth back at that time. You know, there was no real internet. Publicity and advertising was always word of mouth, friends calling friends, friends testing friends, going, hey, you got to check out this show. And that's why my run of like 77 shows went so well, was people telling other people. There was always half the venue was always new to me, with new people. You know, then I'd hear people driving in from, you know, 30 miles away, then 50 miles away, then 100 miles away. And it was shocking. I mean, and then again with Iceland, you know, here I was filling, you know, venues of 1,200, 1,400 people, and they were paying $45 a ticket for me. And I was like, wow, would I pay $45 to see myself?
Yeah.
But it was crazy. And, you know, this is before all these different movements and being careful of what you did. I mean, I became that you know, R-rated or X-rated hypnotist, which did well for the bar shows, but it also hurt my career in other things when people had seen the show, like, oh no, we can't bring him in. He's not a family-friendly show. That video also got me promoters to get me into the Edinburgh Fringe Festival, but because the church owned the venue, and it was the second largest venue at the time, and I had a great 9 p.m. to 10:30 time slot, that 6 weeks before I was supposed to be in Edinburgh, my show was pulled because the church did not want to associate, the whole orgasms, the chairs with me. And so, there's been some missed opportunities, some great opportunities. What we could get away with back in the, mid to late 90s and early 2000s, I probably retired about 70% of my material.
And
had to come
though, wait, though, this is important. Like, so I think it's real. And yet you have still, how many times in the past, I don't know, 5 years, 10 years, have you won Performer of the Year at ACPA though?
Well,
like so what I'm saying is you've worked cleaner and you've still dominated in that market.
Yeah, I've worked cleaner and I've cleaned it up. And then, so APCA has a rule that you can only win once every 2 years. Once you win, you're not qualified for the following year. But I've won, 5 times in the last 10 years. And then I've won Entertainer of the Year twice as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it's evolving, changing up the show, listening to what the crowd wants, talk about, getting in shit for saying ladies and gentlemen on stage.
Yeah. Yeah.
And trying to, clean up our own verbiage and everything else, having, I had one article that looked pretty bad, calling me heteronormative and everything else. And, written by a student. And the funny thing is somebody out there is paying for it to, be on the first page of Google still to this day.
Really?
Yeah. And I would like to find out who the hell that was, but, that's the only one bad thing. But then, I end up being on a hypnosis forum and people calling me out for it, saying that, I should retire or change up my show and everything else. And I'm like, I respect your opinion, but, this is one person's write-up. And if they would have talked to me, I would have explained why I do my skits the way I do them, and I actually had them approved by the school before I even did any of the skits. And they thought it was all funny and loved it. I had one person that was offended for other people. I mean, none of it qualified for her other than her being female who wrote it about me. And, I had one person saying that, I should retire my show and everything else. And I'm like, I must be doing something right, because I'm still Entertainer of the Year.
Right.
Or Hypnotist of the Year.
Sailesh, it costs me a lot of money to run that ad and Google all the time, but if I don't, I'll never work with you out there.
Terry.
You gotta love Terry.
So, Sailesh, tell us, like, so, you've gone through all that. It's a fascinating arc of a career. And certainly by no means are you done, but I'm saying even just that, you've been doing it for a while. You've had a lot of stuff. How do you, let's go a little deeper than just you've done a good job of reading the room and knowing you need to clean it up. Like, how do you think about the craft beyond like that stuff? Like, how do you think about what are you trying to do now with your show from an artistic standpoint?
Artistic standpoint, just keep them engaged, keep them entertained. I look at the stage as the people on stage, they're the stars of the show. Make them look as amazing as possible. And then I have this mindset of, I will only make somebody do something that I would and nothing more. It's not about the shock effect or the embarrassing factor. It's making them look amazing. So I know that's changed about my show, where I'm really mindful about what I make people do, you know, how they even go to sleep on my stage. Don't drop them on the floor, treat them with dignity, treat them like the stars. You know, set the scenario, walk off to the side, let them shine. And then, you know, with having a little bit of comedy background, I can come up with some decent one-liners and, you know, make something a little bit funnier most of the time. You know, 100% of the time it's funnier in my head, but it probably works about 80% of the time.
That's cool. That's cool.
Um,
Is it as fun now as it used to be, or has that changed for you?
you know what? It's still a lot of fun. I'm very mindful of what I do, what I say. You know, sometimes I'll get questioned on something which I don't think was offensive in any way, but yet to some person or a group of people it was. So I mean, that part's a learning experience. Sometimes it's a little frustrating. Sometimes you just want to say, just take a joke. It's a freaking joke, right? You come to be entertained, you come to laugh. It's comedy. And so, you know, there are times where it does feel a little bit like work, but then it's just rewarding afterwards. Having somebody come up to you, and we've all experienced it, every single one of us that's on this, is when you have somebody come up to you and go, I haven't laughed that hard in 15 years. Oh my God, that was amazing. You know, you're incredible. I'd come back to see you again tomorrow. Like when you get responses like that, when you know that you've thoroughly entertained somebody, you know, it makes up for all the difficulties that we're starting to go through. You know, the hoops we have to jump through, the insurances we have to pay and be careful of. You know, I still love it. I still enjoy it.
Yeah, good.
And honestly, COVID, as much as it hurt, was also a little bit of a godsend of realizing, you know, what an amazing life we all have, that we can perform and do things. And I'm re-energized since COVID to get back and do the things that I love doing and appreciate them. You know, instead of feeling burnt out and run down for traveling and doing all those things, or, you know, Grant's on here flying, you know, across the pond and then doing a 2 a.m., 3 a.m. show going, what the hell am I doing here? You appreciate all those moments.
Yeah, good. Hey, let's open it up. What questions do y'all have? Start jumping in.
Who was the hypnotist you first worked with?
Tony Lee.
Tony Lee, okay.
Yeah, he was known as the X-rated hypnotist in Canada. He had done a few shows for a couple of years, but then I was his road manager and helped write a lot of his material. And then when I walked away from him, I took most of the material that I'd helped him write, and that was about it. But he had trained about, I don't know, a dozen other people. You know, the biggest one's Anthony Cools, and a few others that had made it a decent career out of it, a decade or two, and have since retired.
Yeah. What else, gang?
Do you like Sailesh? Hey, good to see you again. But
Good to see you too, Terry.
first get out of the box. Paul and I were talking a little bit over the phone one time. I've switched some stuff up just because I never liked the first skit, and I thought, and DeShalot and I talked about it. So I was just going to do have them laugh or whatever, but kind of a feel me skit. And now it was for a bunch of neuroscientists, and boy, it started rough. And we were talking about, I guess maybe you always ought to start with the command of, oh, you know, grab your keys or grab your instrument or grab, you know, you think that's typically the case where your first skit is more, they're just following your command instead of using any thoughts or feelings or whatever?
It's a little bit of both. I mean, you have to, honestly, I like doing the first skit as a group skit, something fairly or somewhat easy, something that's sort of visual, that they're going to catch on to basically the people that are deeper under and follow them as much as they're going to follow your suggestions, commands. And one of the best things to do, especially when you first start with a skit, is paint a picture or explain the skit like you would to a blind person.
Okay.
Be very narrative, very detailed. Get them to experience something that you could explain it to a blind person. They'd know exactly how to feel. And the more detail you put into it, the more they're going to follow it exactly to a T.
Cool.
Nice.
So, I mean, I've heard some people say, they start off jumping right into it. They don't want to do the hot, cold, or anything else. And I mean, I don't do the hot, but I'll do the cold to jump into it just to see some reactions. I start off my first couple skits with their eyes closed, and then work my way up, find who my anchors are. And a lot of people want to just put all their anchors in the middle. I don't. I want to scatter them throughout the show. I want to have my anchors on each end and scattered throughout in towards the middle, because you're always, people on stage, depending on how many people you have under, they're always going to follow the person next to you or closest to you. Or let's say you're doing a skit where you're going through everybody. You start off with one of your strongest people. At the end, they'll come up with one of the funniest reactions or responses. Everybody else is going to follow suit. If you have a dud at the end, all the responses are going to be duds.
Yeah. I'm going to not borrow a question, but I'm going to back you up just a little bit. You were talking about how fun it is when they tell you they want to come and see you again and they want to do everything. And which I know a very good friend of yours, Terry Growie, and I did a show together a couple of weeks ago. And just because we have a ball together, because neither one of us have a brain. And there was a gal, he was doing the induction and I was knocking him out. But there was a gal on the end of the stage that she had on black shirt, black pants. And like everybody else, we don't know who they are. I've never seen any of these people before. And I didn't think she was going under very good. And I almost, I come that close to just booting her off the stage. But I think Don Barnhart said, we're there to entertain them. If they're not causing trouble and they aren't doing anything, why not let them stay and have some fun? So I didn't boot her. And she wasn't great. She wasn't anything else. But when everything was done and we dismissed them, she come up and she wanted my autograph and Growie's autograph. The lady was mentally challenged and had the time of her life. It made her day. It maybe made her month, which made my heart, because I go, oh, thank God. I'm so glad I didn't boot her. Was she the star of the show? No, not for anybody else except for her closest friends. But it did me good knowing that she was so thrilled to be there in the show. And so, those are some of the fun things that we get to do too. So.
No, absolutely. And I respect you for doing that. A lot of people will, they have to have their stage the way it is and everything else. I agree with you, especially if there's somebody that is mentally, physically challenged. They want to feel normal.
Yes.
They want to be a part of something. And there's nothing wrong with allowing them to stay on your stage and everything else. As long as you know what you can do with them and everything else, but make them feel a part of the group, and then let the other ones that are deeply under, let them be the stars and shine.
Yeah. It was cool for us anyway.
Yeah, and it's a wonderful experience for that. And then sometimes the venues itself, they'll notice that and they go, well, thank you for not kicking that person off stage. We know they weren't hypnotized, but they had a great time. Thank them for making it inclusive to them.
Yeah.
It's cool. What else? Anyone else? I thought there was someone else that.
Yeah, I was going to kind of say, like with attention spans getting so much shorter now, are you changing things up in the inductions? What are you doing to kind of keep it edgy as such? Where do you find that inspiration to keep it edgy without risking the detriment to the show, if you know what I mean? Sometimes I don't want to rush my induction, but I still want to keep the audience's attention.
For me, luckily, I've been able to keep my induction down to 3.5 minutes in a group setting. And usually with that, also the pre-talk helps as well. You know, sometimes when you got a group of hundreds of people in the audience, and some of them can be a little bit rowdy, and again, they don't have an attention span anymore. Even the pre-talk will help. I mean, for me, I tell everybody on my stage to close their eyes and everything else. Then I get them to focus on their breathing for about 20 seconds. Say, focus on your breathing for the next 20 seconds while I speak to the audience. I turn around, look at the audience, and go, audience, I need your help for the next 3.5 minutes. I ask for absolute silence, because the more silence you give me, the more people get hypnotized, more fun we all get to have. Now, the second reason why I ask for this is some people have a little bit of stage fright. But if you want to try this from your seat, if you want to see if this is for real or not, be my guest. Close your eyes. Focus on me. And then you'll get 2 or 3 people hypnotized in the audience as well, which will amaze the audience. But everybody, if they believe that they only have to shut up for 3 minutes, they will. And they'll focus and concentrate as well. So that helps. I mean, with the pre-talk, and then, cutting down your induction time. And then I just go right into the skit.
Yeah, I know sometimes I can get carried away with painting the picture sometimes in the skit setup, if you know what I mean. And sometimes I kind of notice that myself. So yeah, I'm trying to edit as much as I can.
Yeah, but honestly, there's nothing wrong with paint. I mean, once you got them down, and the first thing that the audience notices is the second you drop the first couple of people is they're in awe if they've never seen a hypnotist before. Like, oh my God, look what just happened. They start laughing. Or even before, you even say sleep to the first person, you'll see somebody get so relaxed that, they fall in the lap of somebody else and everything else. And then you'll hear the audience stir up going like, oh my God, did you just see that? So all that is part of the show as well. And just, work with it. I mean, everybody up here is a bunch of professionals that have done, a bunch of shows. So we learn that and everything else. But if there's anybody new listening to this, you find the first person that drops quickly. That's the first person you go to and say sleep to, because everybody else will follow suit just before you even do your first skit and get somebody to be the most animated. It starts even before that. It starts when the first person falls asleep, and how they fall asleep. It'll shock other people on stage going, oh shit, this is real.
I would come back, Grant. I would say be careful about me telling another hypnotist this. Be careful about those kinds of statements, right? Like, I'm like, yes, in some ways attention spans are shorter than ever, but I'm like, last time I checked, people are still binging 8 episodes of Netflix at a time.
Yeah.
Right. So like, when it's consumption-based stuff, if you have their attention initially, you have it, right? So and I think I think it comes back to connect that to what Sailesh just said, is if your management of your group is on point, if it is, I don't think attention spans matter. I think you get them and you've got them. But and I've had nights where my management has not been good, and if your management's off, that's where you end up in trouble. It's not because their attention spans have gotten too short. It's because you didn't do
Connect
properly.
Yeah.
And that's key. I mean, connection's a key. Some people go to me like, well, what happens if you have a bunch of duds and you don't have volunteers right away on stage, or the flow doesn't feel right? You know what? Do 2-3 skits and say, I can carry on with the show, but this is not what I like. Now that you've seen a part of the show, I really want to invite a few more people on stage and have a full stage, because that's the show that I want to give you. And sure enough, they'll rush the stage, and you're looking at yourself going, where the hell were you the first time I asked for volunteers? And there's nothing wrong with doing a second induction.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden the show becomes that much greater. Your buyer, the person that's paying you, is like, oh my God, you definitely made the show so much better. Here's your check. We'll see you next time. All those things matter. So even if we're at that point where, you know, as Paul said, we've all had that, where either nobody knows what to expect because they've never seen a hypnotist before, or their last experience from the last hypnotist that was there was such a bad experience that nobody wants to volunteer because that person's either did a piss poor job or embarrassed the hell out of people that nobody wants to volunteer. But you have to ease people back into it. There's nothing wrong with doing a second induction and getting more people hypnotized and just getting people to enjoy themselves.
Yeah, Paul, conversely, I would throw out that there are far more people binging in 15, 30, 60-second clips than they are on Netflix. A lot more people are watching Zach on TikTok than they are Jim Kellner. I know he's not here right now, but I'm talking smack on doing a TED Talk. Okay.
But you know, I'm so glad you brought that up, Colin. Is again, it's not either or, it's both, right? Like, yes, there's a bunch of people that love to just do this on TikTok. They're like boom, boom, boom. But if they do find something and if they can hold their attention for even 5 minutes, right? Like, then you can get them induced. That's all I'm trying to say. Like,
that was kind of what my question, that maybe worded my question on. That was kind of where I was going with it. Not so much on the getting their attention to hypnotize them, but in the structure and the format of the show. As I almost have a story to my show, if you know what I mean. And there's you know, some of it is painted quite detailed to get to a certain bit, and I feel I can pull the funny out of it.
So your narrative is too long at points, Grant?
Well, yeah, I think sometimes it's not. I think sometimes the show could be, or with the TikTok generation, maybe we could go skit. I've never been one to just bash through loads of skits, but with shorter attention spans, would that type of show be more appealing to certain audiences?
Grant, I think it matters on two different aspects. I mean, if sometimes skits do take a minute or two to get into and everything else, but if you have only long skits throughout the show, then yeah, then I see what you're saying there. I mean, you have to add in, like, for me, what I do is you know, a group skit, then an individual skit, or you know, only 2 or 3 people, then just females, just males, go back to a group. And then in that same breath, you know, if one skit's like all speaking, then the next skit should be an action skit where they're, let's say, playing a musical instrument or dancing or doing something, and then back again to something that maybe take a little bit longer and stuff like that. So just phasing out, where you're not, even if, let's say, your 3 best skits and you saving them for the end, but they're all long skits, it's not as good as scattering throughout the show and putting little bits and pieces in between, or having, you know, something that, you know, as soon as you hear a song, people jump out of the chair and start dancing again, and you play that throughout a show, or a movement or a saying or something.
So, Sailesh, more of an energetic ping pong than
absolutely
building to a crescendo.
Yeah, take it on a roller coaster ride, okay? Where you have your ups and downs, your quick movements, and then things that last longer. Because if you try to stay at the peak the entire time, then your funniest skits aren't as funny anymore.
Yeah. Cool. Hey, we're gonna wrap up the interview portion. We've already gone longer than usual, but it was awesome. Thank you so much, and I appreciate you sharing with us. And we'll bring you back again sometime.
Absolutely, I'd love to.
Awesome.